Now, Anne Boleyn was believed to be born around 1500 or 1501, but her exact date of birth is not known. But we do know that she had two siblings, Mary and George, where she was believed to be the middle child, with Mary being the oldest and George being the youngest. Now, she grew up in Hever Castle with her siblings and her parents, who were Sir Thomas Boleyn and Elizabeth Howard, who was the daughter of Thomas Howard, who was the second Duke of Norfolk, meaning that their family was very prominent and very powerful at the time in England. But they weren't royalty, but they were very close to royalty in power. Now, around 1513, Anne Boleyn was sent to the court of Margaret of Austria in France, where she worked for Mary Tudor, who was the sister of Henry VIII, who was married to Louis XII. Now, around this 1515, Louis XII did die, and he passed on the throne to Francis I, who was married to Claude, and Mary Tudor and most of her ladies were sent back to England, but Claude did decide to let Anne and Mary stay to work for her. Now, it was around this time where Mary did decide to go back to the British court, and Anne did stay for about 7 more years until 1522. Now, Anne was known for being very vivacious and very boisterous, and she was not known for being afraid to speak her mind, but also during this time she did learn a lot about music and religion and the arts, and she did learn needlework, which made her very well versed in a lot of different things. And around 1522 she did decide to go back to the British court, and it was believed it was around March of 1522 when her and Henry VIII did meet, although it wasn't until 1526 when Henry VIII did start openly courting Anne and started openly pursuing her, but Anne Boleyn did refuse at the time to become his mistress. So between 1522 and 1526, Anne Boleyn did have a couple of suitors, including Henry Percy, who later became the Earl of Northumberland, but sadly that didn't work out between the two of them. Then there was Thomas Wyatt, but he was married at the time, so obviously it couldn't have worked out between the two of them anyways, and it really was just mostly flirtation between the two of them. But in 1526 was really when Henry VIII started to take notice of Anne Boleyn, and around this time was when he started really pursuing Anne Boleyn, started courting her, and during this time he did send her at least 17 letters, with at least 17 of those having survived the past over 400 years, and kept on pursuing her. But Anne Boleyn did refuse to become his mistress, and it was around 1527 when Henry VIII really started to get the ball rolling with the divorce between him and Catherine of Aragon, which there was a lot of resistance over the next 6 years from Catherine of Aragon of her not wanting to get divorced from Henry VIII and him keeping on pushing it with her and the Pope, which had come into play a lot in later years, as we will all see later on in her life story. But it was in 1531 when Catherine was officially dismissed from the British court. But during this time, Henry VIII did get some help from a few different people, including Thomas Wolsey, who failed to get Henry VIII what he wanted. And so during this time, Henry VIII did send for Thomas Wolsey to have him executed, but on his journey there, Thomas Wolsey did sadly pass away from natural causes, which was when Thomas Cromwell kind of took the stage and became a more prominent figure in history, and he helped get the ball rolling even more with the divorce between Catherine of Aragon and Henry VIII, and he was very much so a big ally during this time for Anne Boleyn. But yeah, that we'll see later on in her life that this alliance between her and Thomas Cromwell did not stand. But it was on June 1st, 1533, that Anne Boleyn was crowned queen after about 3 months of marriage between her and Henry VIII. On September 7th, 1533, Anne Boleyn gave birth to the only surviving child of her and Henry VIII, which later became Elizabeth I of England, and her birth was well celebrated, including the fact that she was given her own castle, and her half-sister Mary, who was the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, was sent to work for little Elizabeth. And over the course of the next 3 years, Anne Boleyn did try to become friends with Mary I, but Mary refused, and she also refused to acknowledge Anne as queen, and so did her mother, Catherine of Aragon. And sadly, Mary was not treated well during this time. And in 1536, after the death of her mother, Anne did try to get in contact with her one last time, but Mary I still refused, and sadly that was the last time that she did attempt to get in contact with her. And during the time of about 1534 to 1536, Anne Boleyn did have multiple miscarriages, including her last one in 1536, which she did claim was due to the fact that Henry did just have a really bad fall that injured him really badly, and the stress from that for her, but also the fact that Henry did take on multiple mistresses, including the woman who would later become his third wife, Jane Seymour. Yeah, around this time was when Thomas Cromwell and Anne did have a falling out, and Thomas Cromwell did start to help Henry VIII and poison his mind into annulling the marriage or having Anne Boleyn executed. But on May 2nd, 1536, Anne Boleyn was arrested on charges of incest and adultery with 5 men, including her brother, which all 5 of them did get executed, on top of witchcraft and planning to execute the king, which later they were all found out to be all false. And on May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn was sadly beheaded at the Tower of London by someone who was known for being an excellent swordsman from France. Anne Boleyn did a lot of things during her lifetime and during her reign, but she was not the best queen, but she was also not the worst queen, and we must just remember her as a human being and for the things that she did do in her lifetime.